Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a truly fascinating sociological source that explores a deeply complex dynamic. We're going to impartially map out how strict childhood rules, social isolation, and massive literacy gaps are actively shaping adult romantic identities and preferences in Pakistan. It's a brilliant look at cause and effect in sociology, and as you'll see, the breakdown we have for you today makes this whole process incredibly clear.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because this is our central hook. How exactly does early societal conditioning dictate our most private adult realities? The source material we're examining proposes that the rise in same-sex populations, specifically lesbian and gay relationships in this context, well, it isn't just happening in a vacuum. Instead, it's the direct result of a highly specific chain of societal events starting from a very, very young age.
To understand this, we're going to follow a clear chronological journey. We'll start with early childhood rules, explore the systemic education divide, look at digital discovery, examine the male social experience, and finally, contrast private lives with public norms. Let's start right at the beginning of the timeline with Section 1, Childhood Rules and Fears and Early Conditioning. Now, to ground the psychological claims made by our source, we first need to look at this definition. What is social conditioning? Basically, it's the sociological process of training individuals to act in a manner approved by the society in general. What our source highlights here is that in Pakistan, the social conditioning of young girls is intensely focused on extreme caution and absolute physical separation from the opposite gender. And this brilliantly illustrates what that conditioning actually looks like in practice. Look at these specific, fear-based rules instilled in young girls regarding male strangers. From childhood, a girl is taught that a random stranger is essentially a criminal. She's instructed to never talk to, sit with, or leave with random people. No exceptions. Furthermore, there are heavy restrictions enforced by families, including the wearing of the burqa, to ensure this physical and social boundary is strictly maintained. So, the source argues this creates a direct sociological pipeline. It's literally a domino effect. It starts with this deeply planted childhood fear of men. That fear naturally evolves into strict teenage segregation. This leads to intense isolation, which prompts digital discovery, and that ultimately solidifies an adult preference. You really can't understand the adult outcomes without first understanding these foundational childhood fears. So what validates those childhood fears as these girls grow up? That brings us to Section 2, the education divide and literacy impact. The source provides this incredibly critical statistic, a roughly 60% literacy rate compared to a 40% uneducated population. Why does this matter? Well, because as these young girls grow up, they witness real-world events. They hear stories or see actual cases of betrayal, violence, and even assault, often stemming from the uneducated segments of society. According to the source, witnessing these events actively cements the lesson they learned as children, that male strangers absolutely cannot be trusted. Their trust in men is completely broken. It's a stark reminder of how macro-societal data directly influences micro-personal trust. We can see this dynamic even more clearly when we contrast different areas. In the general population, the source notes a severe lack of sex education and incredibly poor communication skills among men when it comes to talking to women. Men often approach women as if they've never even seen one before. But the source contrasts this with high literacy areas, places like Islamabad or Azad Kashmir, where literacy rates exceed 90%. To put that into perspective, in those highly educated areas, there are far fewer of these social disconnects. Education directly correlates to healthier male-female interactions. Let's move on and see how this builds into Section 3, digital discovery and female isolation. During adolescence, girls enter what the source describes as a chaperone culture. Whenever a girl leaves the house, say to go to a tuition center, she is constantly escorted by her father or her brother. And when she's out, the rules are absolute. No eye contact, and certainly no handshakes with male strangers. What this means in practice is that girls grow up with zero organic interaction with boys. None. Their entire social support system becomes exclusively female. This isolation triggers a very specific sequence, and this is totally crucial for forming new identities. It begins with that total loss of trust in men. Confined at home, these girls naturally turn to their smartphones for an escape. The smartphone essentially becomes a lifeline, leading to the digital discovery of lesbian content. This exposure, combined with the reality that only other girls truly understand their lived experience, creates a massive mindset shift. The source states that these girls realize, hey, it's only girls who are with me. no one else. And that solidifies exclusive, strong female-to-female relationships that carry right over into adulthood. But what about the young men? Let's shift gears to Section 4, the male social experience and parallel segregation. The source maps out a completely parallel sequence for guys. Without any sex education, they lack the ability to respectfully approach women. Some even view them merely as tools. Consequently, they default exclusively to their male peer groups. Boy-to-boy contact becomes the primary social outlet simply because they don't know how to navigate interactions with the opposite gender. So the crucial point here is the absolute inaccessibility of women. Even if young men wanted to interact with women, they largely can't. Strict familial control keeps young women totally segregated, and the source notes that many are actually married off to cousins by the age of 18. This effectively removes women from any sort of accessible dating pool. As a result, young men turn to private relationships with each other, mostly out of sheer accessibility and shared social spaces. Which brings us to our final clash. Section 5, private versus public, and clashing norms.
Let's impartially break down this stark duality because it's a massive contrast. On one side, we have the private reality, hidden, same-sex, digital, and physical relationships, driven by a profound lack of communication between genders. But on the exact opposite side, we have the public expectation, a society demanding strict segregation, ultimate public modesty, and adherence to traditions like arranged cousin marriages. According to the source, public relationships are incredibly rare, but private, hidden relationships thrive behind closed doors out of absolute necessity.
Now, what's really interesting here is the specific quote from the source. It translates the cultural view of romantic relationships outside of marriage. They aren't just frowned upon. Affairs and relationships are viewed as a punishment, or azab, by society and families. Natural human connections and the desire to explore relationships are quite literally demonized in the public eye. Which leaves us with this final, overarching question to ponder. When basic human nature and the desire for connection clash with such strict societal conditioning and fear-based rules, which one ultimately prevails behind closed doors? As our source illustrates today, the very conditioning meant to keep people apart often drives them into entirely new hidden identities. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this structured look at the source material has given you a much clearer understanding of how complex sociological dynamics shape the deeply private lives of individuals. Stay curious and keep learning.